Sir, I need to see identification and documentation of citizen status.
I just showed you my driver's license. What's this checkpoint for?
Targeted compliance check in cooperation with local authorities. Where were you born?
Huntsville, Alabama. I'm active duty Air Force. My military ID is in my wallet.
If you need additional military ID...
Captain Derek Chambers had lived in Colorado Springs for 6 years and had driven through the temporary safety checkpoint on North Academy Boulevard exactly 0 times because it had never existed before this Saturday afternoon in April. He just left the commissary at Peterson Space Force Base with a trunk full of groceries, steaks for tomorrow's cookout, ingredients for the pasta dish he'd promised to bring to his daughter's school potluck on Monday, and enough coffee to get him through the next week of early morning intelligence briefings. The checkpoint had appeared out of nowhere, 3 vehicles blocking 2 of the 3 northbound lanes, federal agents in tactical vests directing traffic into a single lane where they were checking every 3rd or 4th car. Derek's silver Toyota 4Runner happened to be one of the unlucky ones, and what should have been a 30-second license check turned into something else entirely when the Homeland Security Investigations agent saw a black man in civilian clothes and decided that a driver's license from Alabama wasn't sufficient proof he belonged in the country. The agent's body camera captured everything that happened next. The vague explanations about compliance checks, the demands for documents Derek didn't carry, and the moment when a 10-year Air Force intelligence officer with a top-secret clearance learned that his service meant nothing when assumptions about citizenship trump basic facts. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. Captain Derek Chambers had never wanted to be anything but Air Force. His father had been a crew chief on C-130s, his uncle had flown F-16s, and his grandfather had served in the Tuskegee Airmen Support Units during World War II. Military service wasn't just a job in the Chambers family, it was a legacy, a tradition, a point of pride that went back generations. Derek had grown up on Air Force bases from England to Japan, had learned to navigate new schools and new friends every few years, and had understood from childhood that wearing the uniform meant something. He'd commissioned through ROTC at Alabama A&M in 2014, had specialized in intelligence analysis, and had spent the last 10 years working his way up from second lieutenant to captain. At 32, he was stationed at Peterson Space Force Base as an intelligence operations officer for a space surveillance squadron, managing a team of analysts monitoring threats to U.S. satellites. It was the kind of position that required not just military expertise but the highest security clearances, the kind where you couldn't tell your spouse what you did at work, where foreign travel required approval, where your entire life had been investigated and verified. Derek was married to Jennifer, a high school English teacher he'd met in Alabama during college. They had 2 kids, Marcus, 13, and Sophia, 10, and lived in a 4-bedroom house in the Briargate neighborhood of Colorado Springs. It was a good life, comfortable and stable, the kind of middle-class existence that military service had made possible for a kid from Huntsville whose parents hadn't gone to college. Saturday, April 13, 2024 was supposed to be a normal weekend day. Derek had slept in until 7:30, luxurious for someone used to 5 a.m. alarms, had coffee with Jennifer while the kids watched cartoons, then headed to the commissary for the weekly grocery run. He'd been in civilian clothes, jeans, a black North Face pullover, and Nikes. His military ID was in his wallet along with his driver's license, credit cards, and the usual detritus of modern life. The commissary trip had been routine. He'd run into a few fellow officers, had chatted about the Broncos draft prospects, had remembered to grab the specific brand of pasta sauce Jennifer had texted him about. By 2:15 p.m. he was loading grocery bags into the back of his Toyota 4Runner, looking forward to an afternoon of yard work and maybe catching part of the Masters tournament on TV. The drive home normally took 15 minutes. Derek pulled out of Peterson's main gate, turned north on Academy Boulevard, and was cruising along at the speed limit when he saw the checkpoint ahead. 3 black SUVs were parked across 2 lanes, orange cones funneling traffic into a single lane, and agents in tactical vests with HSI patches were stopping vehicles seemingly at random. Derek's first thought was that this was some kind of DUI checkpoint, though it was odd to see one at 2:30 on a Saturday afternoon. His second thought was irritation. He had frozen food in the trunk and didn't want it melting while he waited in line. His third thought, the one that came with the familiar tightening in his chest, was the awareness that he was a black man about to interact with law enforcement, and that meant being extra careful regardless of his military rank or security clearance. The line moved slowly. Derek watched as agents waved some cars through after barely glancing at licenses, while pulling others over to the shoulder for what appeared to be more extensive checks. He couldn't discern any pattern to who got stopped and who didn't, which made him uneasy. When it was finally his turn, an agent motioned him to the side rather than waving him through. Derek pulled over onto the shoulder as directed, put the 4Runner in park and waited. The agent who approached was white, mid-30s, with the kind of aggressive posture that Derek had learned to recognize over years of dealing with both military and civilian law enforcement. His name tag read Agent Reeves, and his body camera was clearly visible on his tactical vest, the small red light indicating it was recording. "License and registration," Reeves said through Derek's window, his tone flat and professional. Derek already had both ready, having pulled them out while waiting in line. He handed them over, keeping his movements slow and visible. "Afternoon, officer. What's this checkpoint for?" Reeves examined the license without answering, then looked at Derek, then back at the license. "You're a long way from Alabama, Mr. Chambers?" "I'm stationed at Peterson," Derek said, gesturing back toward the base he'd just left. "I'm active duty Air Force. Been here 6 years. Aha." Reeves was still studying the license. "Sir, I need to see identification and documentation of citizenship status." The request was so unexpected that Derek initially thought he'd misheard. "Citizenship status? I just showed you my driver's license. What's this checkpoint for?" "Targeted compliance check in cooperation with local authorities," Reeves said, his voice taking on an edge. "Standard procedure. Where were you born?" "Huntsville, Alabama," Derek said, his mind racing to understand what compliance check meant and why it required proof of citizenship. "I'm active duty Air Force like I said. My military ID is in my wallet if you need additional verification." "Military ID doesn't prove citizenship," Reeves said, and Derek felt his stomach drop. "I need a birth certificate or passport. You have those on you?" Should federal agents be allowed to demand proof of citizenship at random compliance checkpoints, when people are just driving home from the grocery store? Comment below, because what happened next shows how quickly vague terminology can mask constitutional violations. "No, I don't carry my birth certificate when I'm buying groceries," Derek said, struggling to keep his voice level. "Who does that?" "Look, I'm a captain in the United States Air Force. I have a top-secret security clearance. Everything about my citizenship has been verified multiple times by the federal government. I can show you my military ID, or you can call Peterson and verify my status." Reeves called over a second agent, a Hispanic woman whose name tag read Agent Martinez. Her body camera provided a second angle as she approached Derek's window. "Problem?" she asked Reeves. "Subject claims to be military but can't provide proof of citizenship," Reeves said, as if Derek weren't sitting right there listening. "I didn't say I can't provide it," Derek corrected, his frustration breaking through his attempt at calm. "I said I don't carry my birth certificate in my car. There's a difference. My military ID proves I'm a commissioned officer in the U.S. Armed Forces. That requires citizenship. It's literally impossible to be a commissioned officer without being a U.S. citizen." "Sir, please exit the vehicle," Martinez said, opening Derek's door. Derek's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Every instinct told him this was wrong, that he shouldn't have to get out of his car, that this was escalating in ways that made no sense. But he also knew that refusing to exit could make things worse, could give them an excuse to use force, could turn an illegal stop into something dangerous. He stepped out slowly, keeping his hands visible. The April afternoon was warm, the sun bright overhead, traffic continuing to flow past the checkpoint. Derek was acutely aware of the frozen food melting in his trunk, of the time passing, of the absurdity of standing on the side of a road being questioned about his citizenship in the country where he'd been born, where he'd served for 10 years, where he'd sworn an oath to defend. "Hands on the vehicle," Reeves ordered, and Derek complied, placing his palms on the warm metal of his 4Runner. He could see other drivers slowing down to look, some recording on their phones. Great. Tomorrow his kids' friends would probably see video of their dad being detained on the side of the road. Martinez patted him down, a professional search, efficient and thorough, while Reeves went through his wallet. They pulled out everything. His driver's license, his credit cards, his insurance card, his gym membership, his Costco card, and finally his military ID card. Reeves held up the military ID, examining it closely. The card clearly showed Derek's rank, captain, his photo and his status as active duty Air Force. "This could be fake," Reeves said. "It's not fake," Derek said, his patience exhausted. "Call Peterson Space Force Base. Call the 21st Space Wing Command Post. The number is literally on Google. Tell them you have Captain Derek Chambers detained at a checkpoint, and watch how fast they send someone down here. Or better yet, call the Office of Special Investigations. I'm sure they'd love to hear about federal agents detaining one of their cleared personnel. Are you threatening me? Reeves asked, stepping closer. I'm informing you that you're making a serious mistake, Derek said. I'm a company-grade officer with a TS/SCI clearance. I've been investigated by the FBI, the Air Force, and probably half a dozen other agencies. My citizenship isn't in question. It's documented, verified, and on file with every federal database that exists. What I want to know is what legal authority you have to stop random Americans and demand proof of citizenship under the guise of a compliance check. Martinez looked uncomfortable, her body camera capturing her glance at Reeves. Maybe we should verify through Peterson, she said quietly. We'll verify at the detention center, Reeves said. He pulled out handcuffs. Sir, turn around. You're being detained until we can confirm your immigration status. Immigration status? Derek's voice rose despite his attempts at control. So this compliance check was about immigration all along? I'm a U.S. citizen. I'm active duty military. I just left a military base where I work in a classified facility. My groceries are melting in my truck. And you're going to handcuff me because I don't carry my birth certificate? Turn around, hands behind your back, Reeves repeated. Derek looked at Martinez, hoping for some sign that she understood how wrong this was. She avoided his eyes. He looked at the gathering crowd of onlookers, phones raised, recording. He thought about Jennifer and the kids, about the call he'd have to make from wherever these agents were taking him, about trying to explain to his 13-year-old son why his father, a captain who'd served his country for 10 years, had been detained like a criminal. I'm not resisting, Derek said clearly, making sure the body cameras captured his words. I'm complying under protest. But I want it on record that this detention is unlawful, that I've identified myself as active duty military, and that I've offered multiple ways to verify my identity and citizenship status. None of which you've accepted. The handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, the metal cold despite the warm afternoon. Reeves walked him to one of the black SUVs, placed him in the back seat and closed the door. Through the window, Derek could see Martinez dealing with his vehicle, apparently calling for a tow truck. Derek sat in the back of the SUV for over an hour while the agents continued their checkpoint operations. His phone was in his pocket, but with his hands cuffed behind him, he couldn't reach it. The frozen food in his trunk was definitely ruined by now. Jennifer would be wondering where he was. He'd told her he'd be home by 3 p.m., and it was nearly 4:30. Finally, the checkpoint operations ended. Reeves got in the driver's seat, Martinez in the passenger seat, and they began driving. Not toward Peterson, Derek noted, but toward the federal building downtown. Where are you taking me? Derek asked. Detention facility for processing, Reeves said. Standard procedure for individuals who can't provide citizenship documentation. I'm a captain in the United States Air Force, Derek said again, his voice tight with controlled anger. I don't need to provide citizenship documentation because my military commission proves my citizenship. This is a violation of federal law, and when my command finds out where I am, this is going to become a very big problem for you. Neither agent responded. They drove in silence to the federal building, parked in the underground garage, and walked Derek through corridors until they reached a processing area. There they finally removed his handcuffs and began the formal detention process. Name? The processing officer asked, a woman in her 40s who looked bored with her job. Captain Derek Chambers, United States Air Force, Derek said, his military bearing coming through despite the circumstances. The woman looked up for the first time. Did you say captain? Yes. She looked at Reeves. You detained an Air Force captain? He couldn't provide citizenship documentation, Reeves said defensively. Did he show military ID? Yes, but nothing. The woman was typing rapidly on her computer. Military ID requires citizenship. You can't commission without being a U.S. citizen. It's basic federal law. She pulled up something on her screen, her expression shifting from bored to alarmed. Oh my God. He has a TS/SCI clearance. You detained someone with a top-secret clearance and didn't verify through his command. Derek could see Reeves' face paling. We were following protocol for the compliance check. What compliance check? The woman's voice was sharp now. What legal authority did you have for this stop? Where's the operational plan? Where's the supervisory approval? Reeves had no answer. Martinez looked at the floor. The processing officer looked at Derek, genuine concern replacing her earlier boredom. Sir, I apologize. This should never have happened. We're releasing you immediately. I want documentation, Derek said. I want a record of this detention, the names of everyone involved, and a full explanation of what legal authority was used to stop me at that checkpoint. The woman nodded. You'll have all of that. I'm also reporting this up my chain of command. This is really bad. Within 30 minutes, Derek was released with his possessions returned and apologies that meant nothing. He called Jennifer from the federal building's lobby, standing in his rumpled civilian clothes, exhausted and angry. Where have you been? She asked. I've been worried sick. Why didn't you answer your phone? I was detained, Derek said. Federal agents. At some kind of checkpoint they called it compliance check. Turns out it was really about immigration. They didn't believe I was a citizen. Silence on the other end. Then, Derek, what are you talking about? You're active duty military. I know. It didn't matter. They wanted my birth certificate. When I couldn't produce it, they handcuffed me and brought me downtown. They handcuffed you? Jennifer's voice was rising. A captain? With a clearance. They didn't care about any of that. Derek was walking toward the exit, needing to get out of the building. Can you come pick me up? My truck got towed from the checkpoint. I'm on my way. Derek, we're getting a lawyer. This can't be legal. It's not, Derek said. Trust me, it's not. By the time Derek got home, after retrieving his 4Runner from impound and dealing with the ruined groceries, it was nearly 8 p.m. His kids wanted to know why he'd been gone so long, and Derek struggled to explain in age-appropriate terms that sometimes bad things happen to good people, that even their dad who served in the military could be treated unfairly. That night he couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the stop, the vague compliance check language that had masked an immigration enforcement operation, the questions, the handcuffs, the hours sitting in the back of that SUV. He was a captain. He had a top-secret clearance. He'd served his country for 10 years, had deployed to war zones, had given the best years of his life to the Air Force. And none of it had mattered to agents who saw a black man and demanded proof he belonged. Monday morning, Derek called a law firm that specialized in civil rights cases. By the end of the week, they'd reviewed the body camera footage, which the agents had been required to preserve, and had begun building a case. The footage was damning. Derek clearly identifying himself as military, showing his military ID, offering to verify through Peterson, all of it ignored in favor of demands for documents he had no reason to carry. The lawsuit filed 3 weeks later was comprehensive. Captain Derek Chambers versus United States Department of Homeland Security, Agent Reeves, Agent Martinez et al. The complaint alleged violation of Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable seizure, false imprisonment, racial profiling, deception through misleading checkpoint terminology, and deprivation of rights under color of law. The evidence was overwhelming. The body camera footage showed the entire stop from multiple angles. The checkpoint itself was questionable. HSI couldn't produce clear authority for conducting what they termed a compliance check, but was actually immigration enforcement on a public road. Derek's military records proved his citizenship and his years of service. Security experts testified that detaining someone with his clearance level without verification was a massive security breach. Most damaging was the revelation during discovery that the checkpoint had stopped 37 vehicles that afternoon. 31 were waived through after-cursory checks. 6 were detained for additional screening. All 6 were drivers of color. The pattern was undeniable, and the use of the vague term compliance check appeared designed to obscure the checkpoint's true purpose. The case went to trial 18 months later. The federal courtroom was packed with active duty and retired military members, many in uniform, who saw Derek's detention as an insult to everyone who served. Derek testified for 2 days, describing his military career, his clearance level, his attempts to verify his identity through official channels. He described the handcuffs, the detention, the humiliation of being treated like a criminal while groceries melted in his truck. He specifically noted how the agents had used the term compliance check, initially, only revealing the immigration enforcement purpose when he questioned their authority. "I've served this country for 10 years, he told the jury, his voice steady despite the emotion underneath. "I've deployed to places I can't talk about, done work I can't discuss, held secrets that protect American lives. And federal agents decided that none of that mattered because I didn't carry my birth certificate to the grocery store. They saw a black man and assumed I didn't belong, despite my military ID, despite my willingness to verify through official channels, despite basic logic. And they tried to disguise what they were really doing by calling it a compliance check, instead of what it actually was, immigration enforcement without proper authority." Military personnel experts testified about the impossibility of commissioning without citizenship verification. Constitutional scholars testified about Fourth Amendment requirements and how using misleading terminology didn't change the unconstitutional nature of the checkpoint. Former federal agents testified that the checkpoint and detention violated every protocol for lawful stops. The defense tried to argue the agents were following procedure, but couldn't explain why Derek's military ID wasn't accepted when it literally proved citizenship. They couldn't explain why they didn't call Peterson when Derek offered to verify. They couldn't explain the racial disparity in who got detained. And they couldn't justify why they'd used the vague term compliance check for what was clearly immigration enforcement. The jury deliberated for 9 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. The damages reflected their outrage, $12.4 million. $4.9 million in compensatory damages for emotional distress, violation of rights, and damage to Derek's sense of security in the country he served. $7.5 million in punitive damages, calculated to send an unmistakable message about the cost of racial profiling in federal enforcement and the deception of using misleading terminology to conduct unconstitutional checkpoints. Derek sat quietly as the verdict was read, Jennifer beside him, his command section filling the courtroom's gallery. The money was significant, but more important was the validation. A jury saying definitively that what happened was wrong, illegal, and unacceptable, and that disguising immigration enforcement as compliance checks didn't make it legal. Agents Reeves and Martinez were terminated and faced federal charges. HSI implemented sweeping changes: elimination of random compliance checkpoints, requirements to verify military credentials immediately, clear disclosure of checkpoint purposes, mandatory training on recognizing military IDs, and accountability for racial profiling. Derek continued serving, though the stop had changed him. He now carries copies of his birth certificate, passport, and military orders in his vehicle, a precaution that shouldn't be necessary but has become routine. He speaks at civil rights forums and military diversity events, his story a reminder that service and sacrifice don't always protect against discrimination, and that vague official terminology can often mask constitutional violations. The body camera footage became a case study in federal law enforcement training, a stark example of how assumptions can override facts, how misleading language can obscure illegal enforcement, and how even those who serve can be subjected to constitutional violations when bias drives operations. And in Colorado Springs, Derek still does his grocery shopping on Saturdays, still drives the same route home, but never without remembering the day when frozen food melted in his trunk while federal agents decided his military service wasn't proof enough that he belonged in America, and tried to hide what they were really doing behind the benign-sounding phrase compliance check. If you believe military service should be respected, that checkpoints should clearly state their purpose, and that racial profiling has no place in federal enforcement, hit subscribe. Because Derek's story proves that wearing the uniform doesn't always protect you when assumptions about who belongs override the facts standing right in front of you.